She pointed at my bed at 1:45, standing in the doorway in the same clothes she'd arrived in 12 hours earlier, a half-empty roll of packing tape still looped around her wrist, and said, "Which side is mine?" 6 years of the flat had been reduced to 43 boxes by 11:30. We'd made a system. I labeled. She judged what I was allowed to discard. I disagreed with her on 4 items, and she was right about all of them. By 11, she'd ordered Thai food that neither of us had quite finished. By 1:45, the last box was sealed, and she was standing in my doorway, the tape still on her wrist, looking at the one thing I hadn't yet dismantled. I did not immediately answer. My name is Marcus Hale. I'm 34. I work as a building conservation officer for a regional heritage trust. I assess historic structures, write technical reports on what can be preserved, what has already been lost, and what is worth the considerable effort of keeping. My flat until tonight was a 3rd-floor, 1-bedroom in a converted Victorian warehouse in the kind of neighborhood that used to be affordable. I was moving because the lease had ended, and the landlord's renewal figure was aspirational in a way I found genuinely insulting. There was a clearer reason. I was not examining it closely. Her name was Lena Price. We had met at 21 in a shared house after university, in the way 2 people meet when they have both independently believed they were renting the same room. The landlord had double-listed. We sorted it out. I took the smaller room. She took the one with the south-facing window. And I spent the following 2 years in that house knowing this had been the right allocation, and not exclusively because of the natural light. That was 7 years ago. She was 31. She taught year 4 at a primary school 2 miles from the flat she'd moved to 2 years back when a relationship had required it. The relationship had ended. She hadn't moved back. She came over frequently enough that it didn't seem to matter. She had a habit of holding mugs with both hands, regardless of temperature, full hands first, then the drinking second. She pressed her thumb against her fingers when she was thinking, counting something that had no number. She laughed at her own jokes before she finished them sometimes, then looked at you to check whether you'd got there too. And her expression when you had was very specific and worth some effort to earn. She showed up. For everything. The appointment I didn't want to attend alone. The news that didn't warrant a phone call but needed to be said out loud to someone. Tonight. She'd arrived at 11 in the morning with coffee in both hands and an operational expression, and had not left. We had been best friends for 7 years. We had each treated this as the primary fact of the situation. I was no longer certain that was an accurate reading of the primary fact. The Penelope Fitzgerald paperback on my storage room shelf. She had lent it to me 2 years earlier with a post-it on the inside cover in her handwriting. Return when you've stopped lying to yourself about it. I had assumed this referred to the novel's ending. The Gate of Angels concludes in a way that requires the reader to decide whether they believe it, and she had told me I would resist. I had applied the instruction to the book. I had not, until this afternoon, considered whether it had a wider application. She arrived at 11 in the morning and assessed the living room with the expression of a person who has already formed a plan and is confirming the plan is viable. The flat smelled of cardboard and the variety of low-level regret that comes from discovering how much you have accumulated over 6 years and how little of it you can clearly account for. She set the coffees on the kitchen counter, looked at the room, and said, "Right." By noon, we had a system. The system was primarily hers. I moved boxes. She organized. She was extraordinarily good at categorizing what a person's actual relationship to an object was versus what they were telling themselves it was. She held things up. I attempted to justify them. She either nodded or said, with complete evenness, "You haven't used this once in the time I've known you." and I either agreed or did not. And she was right about everything she said no to. By mid-afternoon, we had cleared the living room and the kitchen, and were working in companionable silence, broken by the occasional assessment from her and the occasional counter-argument from me that she received with the patience of a person who already knew they were right. There was a quality to the afternoon that I recognized. The years had furnished us with a specific grammar, a way of occupying shared space that required very little upkeep. We had always been efficient together. She made me less interested in performing any particular version of myself, which had the side effect of making me more honest, without intending to be, in ways I noticed only after the conversation had moved on. We reached the second bedroom, the room I'd been using as storage, and the box on the far shelf that I had not labeled because I'd known it was there without examining it in several years. She reached it before I did. She set it on the floor and opened it. Inside, a phone charger she'd left in 2021, a dark green jumper under it, and the paperback, Penelope Fitzgerald, The Gate of Angels, its spine bent soft from multiple readings, with a post-it on the inside cover in her handwriting. Return when you've stopped lying to yourself about it. I had believed, when she'd given it to me, that this referred to the novel. The Gate of Angels ends in a way that requires the reader to decide whether they believe it, and she had argued I would resist. I had assumed. She read the post-it without expression. Then she looked at the jumper. Then she looked at me. "You kept the box," she said. "It's your box," I said. "I haven't asked for it in 3 years." A pause, her thumb pressing against her fingers in the way she did when she was counting something. "You didn't pack it with the rest of the flat." I had found the box 3 days earlier when I'd begun sorting the storage room, and I had moved it to the shelf I was clearing last. I had a reason for this that I was not ready to commit to language. "It was already in there," I said. She looked at me in the way she looked at me when she was deciding whether to say the next thing. Then she set the box aside and went back to the living room, and neither of us named the thing the exchange had left in the air. And the air settled into something it hadn't been that morning. By 5 in the afternoon, I had shifted 26 boxes to the hallway, and she had made me discard 11 items I had subsequently acknowledged were correct calls. I thought about this on the way back from the kitchen with 2 glasses of water. The honest version of the evening, the version I had been organizing carefully away from for 7 years, was that she was the person around whom I thought most clearly. Not because she directed or managed me, but because in her company something that spent most of its energy on performance or maintenance simply went quiet. I had attributed this, for 7 years, to the specific quality of very good friendship. I was standing in my own emptied hallway considering whether this attribution had been doing the work I'd asked of it. The problem with very good friendship, as a category, is that it is capacious. You can put a great deal inside it and keep the lid closed for a significant period of time. I had been doing this. I was aware that I had been doing this. I was also aware that the box on the storage room shelf, her charger, her jumper, her paperback, had always been the version of that problem I had declined to look at directly. I do not have reliable instincts where Lena Price is concerned. This is a thing I have known about myself for 7 years and treated as a neutral fact rather than useful information. In my line of work, we call this a known condition. You document it. You account for it in the assessment. You do not pretend it isn't there and then act surprised when the wall fails. She handed me a marker through the doorway. The kitchen boxes need kitchen before the bathroom boxes. Alphabetical. That's an unusual system. It's a very good system, and you'll thank me when you unpack. I wrote kitchen on the kitchen box. I noted, doing a highly competent job of carrying things. 3 months ago, at Priya's birthday dinner, I'd gone to the kitchen for a second bottle and been gone perhaps 4 minutes. When I came back, Lena was looking at her wine glass with the particular focus she reserved for things she decided not to say, and Priya had gone slightly quieter than the evening called for. I asked what I'd missed. Priya said nothing, and then quickly told Lena to tell me the story about the school trip, and Lena had, and it was very funny, and I'd laughed. I'd thought about what I'd missed on the drive home and for several nights afterward. I hadn't asked. I had filed it. I had a substantial cabinet of filed things where Lena was concerned. It was very organized. It took up exactly the right amount of mental shelf space. I had no particular intention of going through it. 6 weeks before that, she'd called at 11. This wasn't unusual. But she'd started a sentence. I'd heard the shape of it in her voice before she pulled back, and redirected cleanly into something else. A child in her class had done something unexpectedly funny that week. She was a genuinely good storyteller. I'd laughed, put the phone down at midnight, and lain awake for the better part of an hour without examining why. The Polaroid surfaced at 7. In the bottom of the storage box, under the charger, under the jumper, under the paperback, was a photograph from a birthday party 4 years back. Summer, a marquee in someone's garden. Neither of us had known it was being taken. A mutual friend had had a disposable camera and posted prints to everyone afterward. I had received mine and put it somewhere without consciously placing it, apparently here. In the photograph, she was mid-laugh, looking at something across the marquee. In the photograph, I was looking at her. Not the way you look at a friend enjoying herself. Something more specific. Something that had apparently been visible from a sufficient distance for someone with a disposable camera to catch and develop and post to my flat. She found it in the box before I did. She held it for slightly longer than the photograph required. "What are you doing with it?" she said. "Keeping it," I said. She looked at me very briefly, just once, then said, "Which box?" I didn't answer. She set the Polaroid on the shelf and went back to the box, and we finished the storage room, and the photograph eventually went into my jacket pocket rather than any box, and neither of us mentioned it again. One more thing I had been filing. She had come to see the new flat with me 2 months ago, when I'd been deciding between 2 options. She'd stood in the kitchen of the one I'd eventually chosen and been quiet for a moment in the way she was quiet when something was landing. Then she'd said, "You'd be comfortable here," and looked at the second bedroom, which the listing described as a study, and then at me. She hadn't said anything else. I had taken the flat the following week. I had not examined the look. The flat was 720 square feet, slightly larger than one person needed. I had chosen it without committing to a reason. I was committing to the reason now, quietly, in the way you arrive at things you've known for longer than you've been willing to name. By 10, the main work was done, and she'd ordered food, and we sat on the floor of the emptied living room, surrounded by 43 sealed boxes, eating from the containers. The flat without its contents had changed acoustically. Old warehouses converted to residential have a specific resonance. Sound behaves differently in empty space, a little slower, a little fuller. Our voices were lower than they'd been all evening. We talked about the school year ending and the conservation assessment I had coming in autumn and whether the restaurant 2 streets away was still open. We talked easily, the way we had always talked, which was not carelessly, but with the ease of people who had stopped needing to construct anything, who could simply be in the same space and speak when speaking felt right and not when it didn't. Beneath it was the thing that had been present since the storage room, and that neither of us had named. By 11:30, the food was done, and the flat was quiet. She was leaning against the wall with her knees drawn up, looking at the empty middle of the room, the absence of the furniture that had occupied it for 6 years, the pale squares on the floor where rugs had been, the 4 cleaner patches of wall where pictures had hung. The tape dispenser was still on her wrist. She had not noticed. I had noticed and said nothing, because some things are too specific to point out without meaning more than you intended to. I looked at her, looking at the room. She had been here the day I moved in, too. I had forgotten this until now. She'd helped me haul boxes up the stairs and made me eat something at 9 in the evening because I had been too caught up in the assembly of furniture to manage food. She had been first in and she was last out, and I had not, until this moment, thought about what it meant that this was consistent. 7 years of it. 7 years of being the person she called. The post-it in the paperback said, "Return when you've stopped lying to yourself about it." I was standing in this empty room at midnight, applying that instruction to a wider body of material than the novel. She looked up. "I don't want to get the tube," she said. Neutral, factual, tired. "It's late." "You can stay," I said. Also neutral, also factual, also aware that in the context of an emptied flat with 1 unmade bed and 43 boxes, this was not a fully neutral exchange. "I know," she said. We looked at each other for a moment past the length the sentence needed. The bed was the one thing I hadn't taken apart. I'd been going to, then decided the mattress was better moved as furniture than broken down and boxed. And the removal company was coming in the morning, which meant it was still there, made with the sheets I'd slept in all week, in the room from which everything else had been emptied. She stood in the doorway, one hand on the frame, the tape dispenser on her wrist. Finally noticed. She looked at it, pulled it off, set it on the floor, looked back at me. She pointed at the bed. "Which side is mine?" She said it lightly. The word choice was not light. I looked at her for a moment. "You don't have to mean that the way it sounds," I said. "I'll take the floor. There's a sleeping bag somewhere in the hallway stack. This doesn't have to be anything more than a late night." She looked at the bed, then at me. The expression on her face was careful and specific, and braver than it appeared entirely comfortable with. "What if I do mean it the way it sounds?" I went still, not visibly, just inside. "Then say so," I said. Clearly, I'd rather not manage a misunderstanding. She was quiet for a beat. The kind of quiet that precedes something that has been waiting a considerable time for its correct moment. "I drove here this morning at 8:40, she said, "to help you pack a flat I didn't want you to leave." She looked at the window, the city outside, late and orange lit. "I've thought about you moving to a flat that was slightly too large for one person, and I tried not to think about why I'd noticed that." A pause. "I've been trying not to think about a number of things for a number of years. I'm tired of how much energy it takes." That landed somewhere specific. I crossed the room. Not urgently. There was no need for urgency. We had apparently been moving toward this for 7 years, and the remaining 3 feet of empty floorboard were not the variable that was going to matter. "The box," I said. "I didn't pack it with the rest of the flat because I've never wanted your things to leave. That's the reason. The new flat is larger than I need for one person because I'd been hoping, without saying so, without deciding to, that it wouldn't be one person." I looked at her directly. I want to be accurate about that. She looked at me for a long moment. Her thumb was pressing against her fingers. "The right side," she said. "That's mine. I sleep on the right." She hadn't asked which side I used. She already knew. She'd stayed once, 3 years ago, when her boiler had failed, and she'd taken the right side without discussion, and I had remembered this. She knew I had. I put my hands carefully on her face. She closed her eyes. I thought, this is not new. This is a very old thing that has simply stopped pretending to be something smaller. I kissed her, gently, chosen by both. From somewhere in the stack of 43 boxes in the hallway, my phone began playing an alarm I'd set for the morning and entirely forgotten. 6:45 a.m. It played for 15 seconds and then muffled itself against whatever I had packed around it. She pulled back just far enough to look at me. You set an alarm for tomorrow, for the removal company, and then packed the phone in a box. It seemed efficient at the time. She pressed her mouth together. The effort was visible. It was not successful. She started laughing first, the real kind, the one she didn't perform for an audience. She took the right side. In the morning, the removal company arrived at 7 and were efficient and professional, and gave every indication of not noticing that one of the flat's occupants was directing the operation in yesterday's clothes, holding coffee in both hands while issuing logistical guidance. They had, I suspected, moved people before. They had probably moved people in more complicated circumstances than this. The new flat had better light in the kitchen. She noticed on the first afternoon, standing at the window with her mug held in both hands, and said so in the tone she used for things she'd already calculated. I said nothing. She looked at me briefly. She went back to unpacking. Months later, her things moved in properly. Not a box. The organic accumulation of someone who has stopped maintaining a fiction about how often they're staying. A phone charger by the bed. The green jumper on the hook near the door. The Fitzgerald paperback on the shelf, rearranged so the post-it faced inward, seen only when you pulled it out, which I considered a reasonable editorial decision and did not contest. Years later, when people asked how it started, she said packing tape and Thai food, and one question at midnight. I said it started at 21 in a shared house where we'd both booked the same room, and that I had been a slow reader, but I'd got there. She said this was the most Marcus Hale thing she had ever heard me say. I took this as accurate. It was not new. It had probably always been exactly this. We had simply run out of boxes to pack it into. What would you have done if you'd spent a whole day helping someone you cared about prepare to leave, and then realized you didn't want them to go anywhere without you? And have you ever kept something safe for so long that the keeping itself was the answer before you'd admitted the question? Leave your answer in the comments. If this one stayed with you, a like and a subscribe means I'll keep making them, and I'll see you in the next one.